Things Fall Apart, Part 1, Chapter 1. Okonkwo was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His fame rested on solid personal achievements. As a young man of 18, he had brought honor to his village by throwing Amalinze the cat. Amalinze was a great wrestler who for 7 years was unbeatable from Umuofia to Umbiano. He was called the cat because his back would never touch the earth. It was this man that Okonkwo threw in a fight, which the old men agreed was one of the fiercest since the founder of their town engaged the spirit of the wild for 7 days and 7 nights. The drums beat and the flute sang, and the spectators held their breath. Amalinze was a wily craftsman, but Okonkwo was as slippery as a fish in water. Every nerve and every muscle stood out on their arms, on their backs, and their thighs, and one almost had them stretching to breaking point. In the end, Okonkwo threw the cat. That was many years ago, 20 years or more, and during this time, Okonkwo's fame had grown like a bushfire in the Hamatan. He was tall and huge, and his bushy eyebrows and wide nose gave him a very severe look. He breathed heavily, and it was said that when he slept, his wives and children in their houses could hear him breathe. When he walked, his heels hardly touched the ground, and he seemed to walk on springs, as if he was going to pounce on someone. And he did pounce on people quite often. He had a slight stammer, and whenever he was angry and could not get his word out quickly enough, he would use his fist. He had no patience with unsuccessful men, and he had had no patience with his father. Unuka, for that was his father's name, had died 10 years ago. In his day, he was lazy and improvident and was quite incapable of thinking about tomorrow. If any money came his way, and he seldom did, he immediately bought gorges of palm wine, called round his neighbors, and made merry. He always said that whenever he saw a dead man's mouth, he saw the folly of not eating what one had in one's lifetime. Unuka was, of course, a debtor, and he owed every neighbor some money, from a few cowries to quite substantial amounts. He was tall, but very thin, and had a slight stoop. He wore a haggard and mournful look, except when he was drinking or playing on his flute. He was very good on his flute, and his happiest moments were the 2 or 3 moons after the harvest, when the village musicians brought down their instruments, hung over the fireplace. Unuka would play with them, his face beaming with blessedness and peace. Sometimes another village would ask Unuka's band and their dancing egugu to come and stay with them and teach them their tunes. They would go to such hosts for as long as 3 to 4 markets, making music and feasting. Unuka loved the good fare and the good fellowship, and he loved this season of the year, when the rains had stopped and the sun rose every morning with dazzling beauty. And it was not too hot either, because the cold and dry Hamatan wind was blowing down from the north. Some years, the Hamatan was very severe, and a dense haze hung on the atmosphere. Old men and children would then sit round log fires, warming their bodies. Anuka loved it all, and he loved the first kites that returned with the dry season, and the children who sang songs to welcome them. He would remember his own childhood, how he had often wandered around, looking for a kite, sailing leisurely against the blue sky. As soon as he found one, he would sing with his whole being, welcoming it back from its long, long journey, and asking if it had brought home any length of cloth. That was years ago, when he was young. Anuka, the grown up, was a failure. He was poor, and his wife and children had barely enough to eat. People laughed at him because he was a loafer, and they swore never to lend him any money because he never paid back. But Unuka was such a man that He always succeeded in borrowing more and piling up debts. One day, a neighbor called Okoye came in to see him. He was reclining on a mud bed in his hut, playing on the flute. He immediately rose and shook hands with Okoye, who then unrolled the goat skin, which he carried under his arm, and sat down. Onuka went into the inner room and soon returned with a small wooden dish containing a kola nut, some alligator pepper, and a lump of white chalk. I have kola, he announced when he sat down and passed the dish over to his guest. Thank you. He who brings kola brings life, but I think you ought to break it, replied Okoye, passing back the dish. No, it is for you, I think. And they argued like this for a few moments before Unuka accepted the honor of breaking the kola. Okoye, meanwhile, took the lump of chalk, drew some lines on the floor, and then painted his big toe. As he broke the kola, Onuka prayed to his ancestors for life and health and for protection against their enemies. And when they had eaten, they talked about many things, about the heavy rains which were drowning the yams, about the next ancestral feast, and about the impending war with the village of Imbiano. Onuka was never happy when it came to wars. He was in fact a coward and could not bear the sight of blood, and so he changed the subject and talked about music, and his face beamed. He could hear in his mind's ear the blood-stirring and intricate rhythms of the Ikwe, and the Udu, and the Ogini, and he would hear his own flute waving in and out of them, decorating them with a colorful and plaintive tune. The total effect was gay and brisk, but if one could pick out the flute as it went up and down, and then broke up into short snatches, one saw that there was sorrow and grief there. Okoye was also a musician. He played on the ogene, but he was not a failure like Unuka. He had a large barn full of yams, and he had three wives, and now he was going to take the Indemile title, the third highest in the land. It was a very expensive ceremony, and he was gathering all his resources together. That was, in fact, the reason why he had come to see Unuka. He cleared his throat and began. Thank you for the kola. You may have heard the title I intend to take shortly. Having spoken plainly so far, Okoye said the next half of a dozen sentences in Proverbs. Among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and Proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Okoye was a great talker, and he spoke for a long time, skirting round the subject and then hitting it finally. In short, he was asking Inuka to return 200 cowries he had borrowed from him more than 2 years before. As soon as Inuka understood what his friend was driving at, he burst out laughing. He laughed loud and long, and his voice rang out clear as the Ogini, and tears stood in his eyes. His visitor was amazed and sat speechless. At the end, Inuka was able to give an answer between fresh outbursts of mirth. Look at that wall, he said, pointing at the far wall of his hut, which was rubbed with red earth, so it shone. Look at those lines of chalk. And Okoye saw groups of short perpendicular lines drawn in chalk. There are 5 groups, and the smallest group had 10 lines. Enoka had a sense of the dramatic, and so he allowed a pause in which he took a pinch of snuff and squeezed noisily, and then he continued. Each group represents a debt to someone, and each stroke is 100 cowries. You see, I owe that man 1,000 cowries, but he had not come to wake me up in the morning for it. I shall pay you, but not today. Our elders say that the sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. I shall pay my big debts first. And he took another pinch of snuff, as if that was paying the big debts first. Okoye rolled his goat skin and departed. When Inuka died, he had taken no titles at all, and he was heavily in debt. Any wonder then that his son Okonkwo was ashamed of him? Fortunately, among these people, a man was judged according to his worth and not according to the worth of his father. Okonkwo was clearly cut out for great things. He was still young, but he had won fame as the greatest wrestler in the 9 villages. He was a wealthy farmer and had 2 barns full of yams, and had just married his third wife. To crown it all, he had taken 2 titles and had shown incredible prowess in 2 intertribal wars. And so, although Okonkwo was still young, he was already one of the greatest men of his time. Age was respected among his people, but achievement was revered. As the elders said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so he ate with kings and elders. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad, who was sacrificed to the village of Umofia by their neighbors to avoid war and bloodshed. The ill fated lad was called Ekemefuna.